Hello and welcome back to the Napoleonic Wars pod and heat number 2 in the Battle of the Marshals series. We actually have just picked up where we left off, quite frankly. I shouldn't really kind of ruin the magic that is the podcasting universe because
I
I'm
completely
sure.
changed my clothes.
Well, we didn't touch on your clothes last time. Perhaps we should. We were going to have banter about, well, no, we're going to continue the parlor game that is guess people's favorite marshal. But I think we're going to dispense with that and instead okay, people who aren't aware,
See,
this
Sam
is
has completely changed her room, her headgear. This is a completely different recording.
the only way
I
in which
haven't
this is
got
going to make
glass.
any sense whatsoever is if people head over to the YouTube channel to then watch us whittering on about banal and irrelevant things like what we're wearing and
We're here to talk about war.
we are here to talk about war. No, we're here to talk about egotism and lack of simple good manners, because that's all the Napoleonic Wars was fought over, according to Rupert Everett and Ridley Scott. But bitchy comments to one side, good at them though I unquestionably can be. Um, we have reconvened. I have decreed that Vanilla Coke is desperately disappointing. This podcast, surprisingly, is not sponsored by Diet Coke. Sam has changed the venue for her recording and is sporting festive headgear. Um, Wobbly Santas adorn her head. Um, for them. Uh, I suspect there's going to be a lot of wobbling going on over the course of this show. And Josh put us all to shame because Josh heard that he was a judge and decided to dress for the part. Sam and I didn't get this memo with the best will in the world. So we both just went for standard jumpers because it's winter. Josh decided to break out the waistcoat and bow tie. But very specifically, the bow tie has bees on it. And I love this detail entirely deliberately, I'm sure. They really weren't deliberate, but never mind, we'll go with it. Entirely deliberately, Josh's bees are pointing downwards, which I'm going to say is a statement against the decline of the insipid Bonapartist regime and the collapse of empire that is always destined to fail, which frankly has made Sam look as though she wants to be sick.
It's not at all actually a sort of a commentary on the fact that I have tie your own bow ties and tie them about twice a year, and it takes me too long to tie them, and it is what it is.
Don't spoil it with reality, man. Just make it up. Everything can be what you want it to be. Just ask Ridley. Um, I said I'd stop with the bitchy comments. I may have lied. Um, but yes, Josh has come suitably dressed for the occasion, whereas I didn't as host. But welcome back, both of you. Josh Prover, master of the Adventures in Historyland YouTube channel, author of Bullocks Grown and Good Madeira on the Maratha and Jat campaigns and Every Hazard and Fatigue on the Siege of Pensacola, available from hellion.co.uk, and Sam Jolly, curator at the Royal Logistic Corps Museum, Worthy Down. It's getting a bit boring describing you as the only charming Bonapartist. Well, only charming Bonapartist might be a bit of a stretch, but
The most charming Bonapartist.
well, we can't be too
Oh,
kind,
oh.
Josh. Let's not go overboard.
You have to come on my
Um,
channel more, Sam.
don't encourage her. Don't encourage her.
Do I get to wear a bow tie on your channel?
Of course you do.
Of
Wear
course
whatever
you
the hell you
can.
like,
Of
within
course you
reason. I
can.
mean, it's a clean show, but I mean that's sometimes a slightly dangerous thing to say to
We are
guests.
audiovisual on Adventures in Historyland, but generally, yes, you can wear whatever you like.
So I shouldn't get out the history hack mankini then.
Sadly not.
Mis misgendered bathing costumes may not be the best thing for the YouTube algorithm.
Well, I was going to say, well, you say that, but actually, what it wouldn't be good for is the fact that it would probably get you banned,
Yes.
which is the more problematic thing. Let us, however, move on to the business in hand, the reason we are here. Round two features a number of significant names in this battle. Davout, the Iron Marshal, the French Wellington, by many accounts. Bessieres, the shrewd operator, as one of as the person pitching for Bessieres suggested. Saint Cyr, a guy who waged war with his mind and was not a yes man, and Jourdan, the man who arguably keeps the revolution alive. How do you assess who these guys are the best? Well, that is the task before our judges. We will listen to each of the pitches, each given by a fan of the show. We will weigh and judge them, and then we will put it also to a public vote. Though, as we discovered at the end of the last episode, my genius system that was designed to stop a tie between different individuals for first place actually might be more than slightly catastrophically and apocalyptically flawed. Maybe. But we will live with it and work it out as we go along. Who to start with? Well, we shall start with Davout, who is championed by a very dear friend of the show, Rachael Stark. Here she is making the case for the Iron Marshal.
I think it's pretty generally accepted by most scholars of the period that Marshal Davout sort of exists in a triumvirate of the top marshals alongside Massena and Lan. And I fully agree with that. I'm not going to say any more about Massena and Lan because they are not in this heat. But for me, Davout pips everyone, including those two, to the title of Napoleon's greatest marshal. And the reason I feel that that's the case basically comes down to three key points. His undeniable talent as a general and commander, his attention to detail when it came to the welfare of his men, and also his very ironclad sense of personal integrity. If I'm going to talk about Davout, I obviously need to start when we talk about his prowess as a general with Auerstadt. I mean, it's just an absolutely glittering victory by any standard of the period, and the odds involved are just staggering. But I don't think Auerstadt is a fluke. I believe that the results of that battle, the results of that victory, really do boil down to the fact that Davout had instilled incredible discipline into his men. And he had really excellent working relationships with his three divisional generals, his famous three immortals, Jourdan, Friant, and Morehouse. And this corps withstands a hell of a pounding, and it secured victory at odds of actually closer to 3-1 than 2-1. But could any of the other marshals have pulled up that victory? I'm honestly not sure, because I think the discipline of that third corps was integral to the victory, and the discipline was wholly down to Davout. He was very clear of what he expected of his men, and he was a hard taskmaster. And consequently, I think that the third corps of that period would stand its ground successfully against any other commander, British, French, or Austrian. But I have seen, people who aren't a big fan of Davout make the suggestion that too much is made of Auerstadt, and Davout's reputation is therefore over-exaggerated. Not that he's a one-trick pony, but that he's too celebrated on the grounds of one chance victory. And I disagree quite strongly with that. And I think if you just look at a fragment of his fighting career, it more than speaks for itself. And look at the crucial role he plays in some of the key Napoleonic battles. Austerlitz, Davout's soldiers had 48 hours to march 68 miles to arrive crucially at exactly the right time to hold the right at Austerlitz. And they're central to the outcome there. Obviously, quite a lot of the marshals are integral to that battle. But Davout is needed to hold the right. And Napoleon was able to make the decisions that he did because he knew that Davout would follow through and he would be exactly where he was supposed to be, exactly when he was supposed to be. And to be able to push your men that hard, to march 68 miles in 48 hours, have them still arrive exactly when they needed, fight all day and still give a good account of themselves, that's incredible. That's an incredible level of discipline. He held the right successfully, again, at battles like Wagram, Eylau. He achieves another notable victory at Ekmul. Davout's entire career, from the revolution right through to the 100 Days, is one of methodical, intelligent command. And I think it's a really just epitaph that I've seen one author refer to him as Napoleon's only pupil. I know I'm on a tight time limit, but I do also want to draw attention to Davout's care of his troops. Now, he's not a man who's celebrated for his warmth. He was cold, he was awkward, he was somewhat socially inept. He wasn't beloved in the sense that some of the other marshals were. He wasn't the type to give those bold, emotive speeches that would have made your heart want to burst and follow him into battle. He wasn't that kind of guy. But he absolutely cared about what was best for his men, right down to the minutiae and tiny details. Nothing was beneath his notice. And we actually have one of his letters from 1806 going to great lengths about how necessary it was to get field cauldrons. So I'm going to quote verbatim. In the case of order for departure, every captain will provide himself an amicable arrangement with the inhabitants with those cauldrons made of non-tin sheeting, which are in use in Germany. The item's not very expensive. It gives the soldier the faculty to prepare his soup. Every company must provide itself with so many as to have one or two extra. It's better to have some abundance in this respect, as they get lost easily. This order must be executed immediately and is given for all arms of the Third Corps. So this was sent to his divisional generals. Even down to something as, manifestly trivial as that. He didn't leave it to his subordinates. He cared about the details. His corps was one of the best turned out and the best equipped going into Russia, and they were the last to run out of supplies. And again, that's not an accident. That's not a fluke. And this was because, while Davout maybe didn't make those big, inspiring, grandiose gestures, he was exceptional at details. He was a really talented administrator, and he absolutely made sure his men were provided for. And he famously fell out with Murat in Russia, I mean, really spectacularly, undermined Murat because he said that Murat's plans would squander his men's lives needlessly, and he would not permit his men's lives to be thrown away when they could be preserved. His last great virtue, of course, is his own personal integrity. He abhorred looting, he abhorred pillaging, and he punished that harshly in his men. He'd permit no disorder of any of that kind, and this meant that Napoleon could trust Davout's corps to go anywhere and do anything without causing needless additional strife by stealing everything that wasn't nailed down. Crucially, he also didn't flounce off in the huff like some of the other marshals did when they felt they weren't praised enough or couldn't work together. Even though he despised Murat, didn't think particularly well of Berthier, when he had to work with him, he did. He undermined Murat in Russia, but when Napoleon ordered him to carry out an instruction, Davout did. He wasn't one for indulging in personal histrionics. And crucially, he always did what he felt was right, even if that wasn't advantageous to himself. And that's, of course, most famously displayed after Waterloo. At the trial of Ney, Davout appeared and was questioned in his capacity as Minister for War. He had negotiated the ceasefire. And he categorically stated to this court that he only agreed to that armistice on the understanding that nobody would be persecuted for their role in the 100 Days. And that had that not been guaranteed, otherwise he would have given battle. And he's saying this during the Bourbon Restoration. This is an incredibly inflammatory thing to say. He and Ney were hardly bosom buddies. He didn't have anything like the friendship with Ney that he had with Oudinot or Saint Cyr or Desaix back in the day. But he was all but putting his own back against the wall to save a comrade that he thought was unjustly treated, even though Ney had cold-shouldered him a bit in Russia for not being able to pull off a miracle and come to Ney's rescue. And for me, that's what separates Davout from the others. There are a lot of very good commanders amongst the marshalate, and there's a few excellent ones. Equally, there's a few good, honest men amongst the marshalate. But for me, Davout is the one who unites both those traits. He was a superlative commander and a man of integrity, and I don't think any of the other marshals in this category can make both those claims. Jourdan, Mortier were men of integrity, absolutely. Saint Cyr was an excellent commander, if a very difficult comrade. But I don't think they can match Davout in uniting both those traits.
Rachael Stark there making the case for Davout, and in her inimitable style making it pretty compellingly. Most of the quotes that I use when it comes to describing the marshals are actually the words of Rachael which I have then appropriated and used for my own ends, not least that brilliant quote that Murat was all balls and no brains. Davout, I describe this one is me, the French Wellington. I'm not the first one to make that comparison, but that is a widely regarded and agreed comment, as Rachel says, one of the top three. Talk about talent, and having we had this discussion, to what extent does Saul have the all-round package, but integrity is unimpeachable. The arriving in the nick of time at Austerlitz, that march is 68 miles. It eclipses Crawford and the Light Division marching, what was it, 48 miles in about 50 hours to get to Talavera, but then missing it. But he's a guy who lacks interpersonal skills. You can never really tell with historical figures and possible neurodivergence, but there's a sort of a little hint of it in that he's not a people kind of guy. He's got a vision and he knows what to do and he does it all very well, but not a popular man amongst a number of quarters. Is that a problem for him? Do you need to be popular with your men in order to be the greatest marshal?
I guess it depends in what way you're popular, because I don't think at any point Rachel argued that he wasn't popular with the men. It's just that he wasn't popular with the men in the same way that the shiny ones are. So the ones like My Beautiful Beloved Lands and Good Old Braves of the Brave Nay, they are popular because they are there, they are symbols. Davout, I think, is popular, but he's popular because he cares about their daily needs. And he was as you said, the best equipped going into Russia and the last one's supplies to run out. He's caring about logistics and he's focusing on logistics and he's getting his men what they need to survive. They're gonna know that because that's what's mattering to them on a day-to-day basis, is whether they've got their soup and their food, not whether their marshal is prancing around with massive thighs with his glossy hair.
This is true. Murat's ostrich feathers are not going to help you in a gunfight or whilst you're camped in -10 trying to work out. Well, I suppose you could try and stew the ostrich feather, but I'm not sure what nutritional value you'd get out of it if you did.
It would look a
Even
bit like Bridget Jones's blue soup.
Yeah, but even my culinary depravity wouldn't induce me to stew an ostrich feather in search for soup. Even I'm above that.
Maybe a whole Highland bonnet.
Oh, I don't know. Think about the sweat. Think about the sweat. That's a grim thought. That's a really, really unpleasant thought. Apologies, listeners. Let us move rapidly on. Josh, you have issues with the concept of the Iron Marshal being touted time and time again as the greatest. Now's your time to say or forever hold your peace.
Indeed. The thing I have issue with Davout with is that's a terrible sentence, but I speak English.
Words,
Feelings, thoughts. But the basic thing is that he comes up time and time again as the obvious marshal that would have saved Waterloo, or he should have been thrown into Spain or something like that, and obviously everything would have changed if he'd been there. That's where I take issue with this fact. That's where I say, no, actually, you don't know what would have happened if he'd have gone to the hell house that was Spain, or something like that. I don't doubt that he would have done a very creditable job, much like Soult did in 1813 and 14. And what you're looking at with Davout is a marshal that is a synthesis, a little, of Berthier and one of the fighting marshals. And he just doesn't have the flamboyance. But he has the reputation. And that's the interesting thing about Davout. Now, was he invincible? No, he was not. In Russia, he may have got out the best equipped, but he got defeated by Platov and Miloradovich. And yes, there are a lot of reasons why his troops did not perform as they usually did during the retreat, but nevertheless, that is on the record. And for a guy who can apparently make miracles like everybody thinks Davout can make, that should be remembered. He was a a soldier, a man, he could only do what a man could do under particular circumstances. However, although I am not as swayed by Davout as some people, there is no doubt that Napoleon knew a good soldier when he saw one. Davout was a good soldier, and he was a dependable one, which is why he used him. He saw it interesting, like in 1805 at Austerlitz, he seemed to know that Davout could be relied upon to get where he needed to be at a particular time, and he hoped it would be the same at Eylau, when the entire second day of that battle was waiting for Davout to show up on the Russians' flank. He actually encountered some pretty serious issues when he hit that flank. He did extremely well all by himself. Let's not make this about tactics. They're all good soldiers. Davout is an excellent soldier. There's no doubt he's very high in this tier.
Are we guilty of overplaying Davout's reputation, though, just because of Jena Auerstadt? Because it is so impossible, because of the scale of what he achieves, and that therefore eclipses the entire debate?
This is an interesting thing, and actually one of the pitches coming up will address that ever so slightly, actually. And I will take it. I will nod at that because Davout has excellently trained troops, excellently supplied troops. His men are in perfect working order. They are not the anachronistic mess that is the Prussian army that is held against them. They are the finest troops in Europe at that time, and a capable commander. That is the core system working how it's supposed to work. A smaller amount of men being able to hold off a larger amount of men until something happens. And so I don't think it can be argued that he's taken on life of his own. I just don't know to what extent that is, honestly.
Okay, Sam, anything else you want to say in relation to Davout?
Nope.
Okay, doke. So a strong case there made by Rachel, but we will now move on to the next of our four contenders. We've got many to get through over the course of this one. Next up, we have Bessieres, championed by Alan Morehouse.
Jean-Baptiste Bessieres, Duke of Istria, Marshal of France, 1768 to 1813. Shrewd operator. I ask you to think about the most one-sided victory against the odds of the Napoleonic Wars without Napoleon present. Most people would cite the Battle of Auerstadt in 1807, where 26,000 French troops under Marshal Davout was victorious over 64,000 Prussians under the Duke of Brunswick. That's 5-2 odds, and resulted in a 2-1 casualty rate in favour of the French, a victory hailed throughout the ages. But note, Davout had his corps intact and well drilled, under commanders he knew well and had confidence in him. Also, he knew that the rest of Napoleon's army was close to the south and Bernadotte's corps to the north. He was alone, but not isolated, and part of the huge Bataillon Carré military machine of La Grande Armée. Let's look at another battle, Medina de Rio Seco, in July 1808. Where? An inconsequential battle in the Spanish Ulster. A Marshal of France, commanding a cobbled-together force of 12,000 men, consisting of one good division, one departmental reserve division, and a smattering of Imperial Guard troops, who had no experience of working together, with mostly estranged commanders, was tasked with anti-guerrilla activities in Asturias, northern Spain. The army reacts to spy reports of manoeuvres to the west from two Spanish armies of Generals Blake and de la Cuesta, 22,000 men in all, attempting to cut Madrid off from the French border. 10 days later, a French army twice the size was surrounded and surrenders, isolated at Bailen in Andalusia. As a result, Bessieres' great victory was for naught, and the French abandoned most of Spain until Bonaparte turned up to sort things out. Another consequence of the battle showed a different skill of Bessieres. After Medina de Rio Seco, he did not pursue the beaten enemy, and a lot of Napoleonic historians are critical of that. The Spanish armies had gone two different directions, and Bessieres, unsupported, was not about to plunge into the Galician hills and risk annihilation like Dupont at Bailen. He recognised, which most senior marshals never learned, but Napoleon knew, that when you are alone or cut off in hostile territory, you don't expend your last reserves unless they will guarantee overwhelming victory. And this was relevant to Bessieres in his career as a Marshal of France. Medina de Rio Seco was an exception. Bessieres, a close friend and confidant of Bonaparte's, mostly commanded the Imperial Guard Cavalry, or sometimes the Reserve Cavalry. Prudent use of reserves was his business, as Napoleon knew. Infantry corps marshals were very frequent in their requests for cavalry support in battles, and the Guard Cavalry obliged in several battles. Notably Eylau, where Augereau's infantry had blundered into a killing zone and had to be rescued by a full charge by Napoleon's main cavalry corps under Murat at the centre of the Russian position. Though successful, that charge was in danger of being slaughtered by a Russian mass countercharge. Bessieres, at the head of the Guard Cavalry, in turn rescued Murat, another personal friend, and saved the battle from disaster. But let's look at his supposed failures that historians love to cite. At Aspern-Essling, Lannes and Massena's corps and Bessieres' reserve cavalry were isolated from the rest of the army north of the Danube, hard up against the mighty river and pressed by Archduke Charles's Austrian army. Lannes, repeatedly and with increasing urgency, compelled Bessieres to charge, but Bessieres stood until finally providing any steady support to stabilise the situation. As it happens, he had held the centre of the field of battle for a day with just cavalry, probably for the first time since the Mongols. After this failure, Lannes' accusation of Bessieres of cowardice, resulting in a fight between the two marshals interposed by Masséna, is better understood in this light. Had Bessieres' charge failed, the whole force could have been rolled up by the Austrians, and even if not, the evacuation the next day would have been even more dangerous with no cover than it subsequently was. Fuentes d'Oñoro was another battle in question. Bessieres was apparently inspecting rear fortifications when the request for his Guard Cavalry to charge arrived. The army was at the edge of Portugal, facing Wellington's army. Maybe he had seen from his position the futility of an 800-horse charge, and maybe this wasn't the battle to push a last mobile reserve so far from home. The most famous of these failures was his advice to Napoleon to not commit the Guard Cavalry to pursue the retreating Russians at Borodino. Historians, eh? Always after that grand charge. Again, the last formed cavalry reserve to be sent off while over 1,000 miles from Paris. Napoleon agreed with him. See the trend? He ended up, in the absence of Murat, in charge of all French cavalry in the army of Germany in 1813. A much reduced arm after the 1812 losses, and at a massive disadvantage to the Allied cavalry. Consequently, he needed to work directly with the novice troopers and committed to involving himself in all matters including reconnaissance. According to Marshal Marmont, on the 1st of May 1813, he foresaw his own death and rode out as white as a sheet. Later that day, while involved in reconnaissance, he was struck by a cannonball and killed instantly. The next day, close by, the French army was surprised by the Allies at Lutzen, a cannonball's throw away, through lack of reconnaissance. So, we know what other marshals and the historians think of him. But what about the Guard cavalrymen themselves? At Wagram, he was wounded when his horse was hit, and word got back to the Guard cavalry who, fearing the worst, purportedly burst into tears. Napoleon was astounded and congratulated him later on the feat. Was he a coward? Indecisive? And just there because he was a long-term mate of Napoleon and Murat, as most historians would have it? Was he just okay? Or was he precisely the marshal Napoleon needed him to be? A cool head, able to assess the situation objectively, with reserve? It is said in later life by Napoleon that if Bessieres had been at Waterloo, he would have won. Could you imagine Bessieres agreeing to Ney's repeated daft charges at the British centre, sucking in every horseman, including the Guard cavalry? Not bloody likely. Would that cavalry have helped at Plancenoit? Quite possibly. I think Napoleon might have been right. The least we can say is that Marshal Jean-Baptiste Bessieres was a shrewd operator.
Alan Morehouse there making the case for Bessieres, the shrewd operator, and I do feel inclined to award points for the use of music. Right at the end of that one. Innovative, I do like it when people come with a different approach to the problem. So loved by his men, a cool head, although albeit that's sort of open to interpretation, and capable. Is the LAN argument a problem for you, Sam? Are we going to have a flat refusal from you to engage with Bessieres because of the LAN beef?
Well, it gets worse than just the fact that Lan accused him of cowardice. Bessieres and Murat together tried to get Lan demoted over some debts, so I cannot engage with this man.
Okay.
It's absolutely no problem with the quality of the pitch. You've done a lovely job, darling. But my personal preferences, I cannot engage.
Are you
Right.
are you abstaining from the judging?
I'm not sure she's even abstaining. I think she's just saying that I'm very sorry, Alan, but it sounds like Bessie is coming last on
Right.
Exactly.
on
Well,
Sam's
I'm
list.
sorry, but a man whose greatest hits moments seem to basically be not committing. That's the vibe I got. He was really great in this moment because he chose not to commit.
Okay. I mean, I did say be nice to our pitchers over the course of this.
You did a great job. I just don't like the man.
Well,
The
I mean
Bessier double ad,
that's
not the picture.
that's emphatic. Josh, are you going to dare to argue against the jolly?
I have a much less personal stake in all of the Marshals than a lot of people, so I can, yes.
I thought you were just going to say you had a less personal stake than Sam. I thought this was going to start turning into a war between my judges.
No. She Sam has her favorites. She's mentioned them in the first episode. Go check that out. So I understand where you're coming from. This person did the man you love wrong, but pardon me. But right, it's a solid argument, and the case is pretty good as well, to be honest. However, like Sam said, the argument does lie somewhat on his caution, his sense, his good sense. And he, again, is not a general who was given large independent commands. He did get thrown into Spain at the beginning. He did defeat the Spanish. Much as I love to defend the Spanish as soldiers and armies that shouldn't be dismissed, for the French army of the Napoleonic Wars at that time, that is not a major problem to deal with. And he showed that by that victory, by basically defeating them all with cavalry. And so that's a bit of a flex, but he doesn't get to flex much else because he then gets given command of the Imperial Guard, and that means you're always in the rear. It's a position of great trust, but after Austerlitz and unless it's the cavalry to a certain extent, you're not going to be wasting them, fleeing them around, making them do dramatic stuff.
But
He's
also,
strangely flam.
sorry to interrupt you there, Josh, but there is also a point that the Guard get committed when the battle's almost won anyway. That's often, I mean, less so 1813, 1814. They become the norm, wear the enemy down and then commit the Guard to achieve that breakthrough. But the point of them is very much they go in when a lot of other people have done a lot of the hard work. So in terms of even tactical success, it's Napoleon who's made a lot of the decisions of where you're going, when you're going, how you're going. So he doesn't. I'm in two minds about this because on the one hand, he doesn't have the opportunity to spread his wings and demonstrate that independence, but at the same time, the the absence of that means that it's hard to turn around and say, look, he has his Jena Auerstadt moment or his Austerlitz. Where is that moment where you turn around and go, yeah, Bessieres.
There's supposedly a very sort of striking moment at the Battle of Austerlitz where he's leading the Guard cavalry forward, and he's a very striking fellow as Bessieres. He's still got his powdered hair and he wears the green uniform. Strange, but nevertheless, he has a style all his own, and he sees the Russian Chevalier Guard approaching, and he sort of eyes them up, And then he turns around to his men and yells, "Let us now make the ladies of St. Petersburg cry," and orders them forward. And this is he and Rapp win the cavalry battle at Austerlitz. Bessieres the marshal. There's a lot to Bessieres as a cavalry commander. He was one of Napoleon's best cavalry commanders. But again, he's sort of a strange sort of divisional level kind of guy as well, because he's not given corps that go running off to do dramatic stuff. He's kept at home, little like some of the others that we'll come up with. I have time for him. He's very credible. I actually believe Napoleon when he says I'd have done a lot better at Waterloo with Bessieres, and he's probably right.
I struggle with that though. I'm not so sure because I think Ney gets a lot of unfair blame. Not that this is about Ney because we've done Ney in the previous show, but I think the point often gets missed of why Ney charges in.
It's not
with
why Ney
cavalry.
charges in. It's why he continues to charge.
That is fair, but the point is that he's meant to pin, right? And it's poor
I mean,
communication that
to the
means he
best of
doesn't.
our understanding, yes. Although I'm sure it's still slightly open to commentary because it is a very weird thing.
It is. It is. But I do wonder how much of that is Napoleon just loving to sling dirt and blame anybody else, but it can't possibly be my fault.
Oh, of course,
in his St. Helena phase,
that's
when
the
it
job
comes
of the
to that
marshals
album
to
of
take
his
the
life.
beating. Take the beating. The marshals take the beating for his faults. No, I have some sympathy with the thought that being the sort of general that Bessieres was, he would have maybe handled it differently. It's Napoleon seemed to think so. Napoleon, for all of his extra kind of thoughts about how things should have gone, knows a little bit more about the marshals than I do. So,
Okay, I'm not sensing huge love for Bessieres
I
in the
don't think
room.
we can. There's not much you can do with it. Is the problem? He's one of those marshals.
He's one of those marshals. Dear me. I'm very sorry, Alan. Hopefully you will feel that we gave you a fair hearing.
It was a very good pitch. It was a very strong case.
It's not the pitch,
Undoubtedly.
it's the man.
I scored it very
not Alan. It's
Yeah.
in my
it's
own
Bessieres that's the problem here.
in my own scoring system. It actually comes that I used to evaluate all of the pitches and whatnot. It came very high.
Okay, so a decent pitch, but unpromising material, and Sam just flatly refusing to.
Despite my dramatic outrage, I will acknowledge that when you are planning a battle, you do need to know when to not commit and to retreat and stuff, and to not use your reserves. I'm fully aware that is a thing before people start coming after me, that you shouldn't just always charge in. So I do understand that there was reasons why he did not do that. I am just sometimes very dramatic.
So men of Twitter, take note. You don't need to go and explain the fundamentals of tactics and warfare to the military historian who runs military museums. And if you try, I will be reaching for the popcorn, quite frankly, because you'll get taken apart by many people who know Sam's pedigree on these matters. We shall move on. Next up, Noah Fink makes the case for Saint Cyr.
Hello, Dr. White and judges. Hope you're all doing well as the holidays are upon us. Just wanted to take a quick moment to thank you all for your time, energy, and dedication to this, and Dr. White, of course, for arranging all the logistics. Certainly a fun project. So my name is Noah, and I will be defending the belated Marshal Saint Cyr. So without some further ado. All of the marshals of the empire were men built for war, and as a composite formed one of the most fascinating collections of military talent in European history. Many were afforded the limelight under which to perform their great deeds and their occasional failures, but Laurent Gouvion Saint Cyr produced a brilliant record that was relegated to the sidelines of both the empire and of history. Overshadowed by political disputes and his all-important yet less glamorous roles of holding the flanks, Saint Cyr was the belated marshal, whose abilities were truly immense. overcoming his imperfections and this belated start to his marshalate career. It was his combination of well-applied intelligence, his talent for warfare in nearly any fashion, and his fierce moral courage and earnestness that propel him to the top of the storied collection and as the best of Napoleon's marshals. Now, certainly, to cover one of the negatives of him, he was certainly intelligent, but this also led to a very aloof and imperious personality, leading to somewhat icy relationships with those such as Massena in Italy and Oudinot in the Russian campaign, which did draw back his ability to collaborate effectively. But such drawbacks held him back to a lesser degree than most, if not all, of his comrades in arms, and his positive traits greatly outweigh those considerations. Foremost among his talents, he waged war with his mind. He was an artist as a hobbyist and a practitioner of the art of war as his career. He understood the impacts of morale and the mind of the soldiers, what one could and could not reasonably expect them to do. This is shown in his late attack at Polotsk, understanding that his men were relatively fatigued and would only have so much energy to fight, so he delayed his attack to great success in what eventually won him his baton. He was able to preserve his troops with skillful maneuver when possible, and while he did see them more so as tools and did not reach for their affections, he certainly preserved lives as best he could. He could perceive a battlefield clearly and calmly, as commented on by Ségur, Marbeau, and other contemporaries. While being calm, cool, and collected, he was similarly able to seize the reins of command and be decisive and take action when the moment called for it, such again as his performance at both battles of Polotsk would show. He also had an understanding of a broader strategic vision, the jockeying over the River Dwina in the Russian campaign, and understanding the impending danger that Dresden was in the German campaign in 1813, and also the need to evacuate Dresden to join forces at Leipzig for that climactic battle, although, of course, the fog of war and an error on the imperial household's portion did not allow that to be completed. Additionally, he was a very talented administrator. He showed this as a minister of war under the Bourbons during the Restoration. Again, showing that the intelligence was both in the back rooms and also upon the battlefield. Similarly, he had a talent for fighting in practically whatever style was necessary during his career. He cut his teeth in mountainous warfare along the Rhine, while successfully extricating himself at Novi as well in 1799. In the earlier years of the Empire, he fought counter-guerrilla actions in Naples in what proved to be very brutal combat, but he was relatively successful there. In Spain, he was tasked with taking Girona, and while he was unsuccessful in that venture, his artist's eye showed a keen understanding of the defensive works that he was working against and had complex drawings to prove it. He was able to fight battles that were relatively complex and involved river crossings. Again, at Polotsk, he had an understanding of when to maneuver between the left and right sides of that river and had a good eye for the overall implications of those maneuvers. At Dresden, he had the combination of fighting a delaying action to allow him to reach the outskirts of the city while outnumbered by Wittgenstein. He counterattacked Wittgenstein's forces on the 25th of August, which bought time for himself and for Napoleon to bring up reserves while it wrong-footed the Allies prior to the two main days of battle there. And in that battle, he did show a talent for urban warfare, urban defense, and the establishments of various redoubts and other extemporaneous defenses. Finally, he was an earnest and morally courageous figure. He was certainly a strict disciplinarian, but provided for his men in Russia and in Spain, sometimes at his own expense and sometimes in the careful management of logistics. And so while he was never loved like some of the marshals, his men certainly had a great respect for him. Additionally, he did not bow down to Napoleon and was certainly no yes man. He spoke quite frankly with him on strategy as prior to Leipzig, and he certainly then did not betray his oaths to his own convictions upon the establishment of the consulate or the empire, nor did he betray his oath to France when he undertook the cause of the Bourbons when they were restored to the throne of France. In the wake of the Hundred Days, he did what he could for France and the army. He attempted to help comrades such as Ney to escape or survive, and he also fought for the concept of the citizen army. He was loyal to the Bourbons when Napoleon made his return, and again showed that his higher calling was to France and his own convictions. Thus, it was with great intelligence, adaptability, and incorruptible moral fiber that Saint Cyr marked his legacy in the annals of French history. He forged it in ink, in stone, and in his own blood, and his exemplary qualities befit the belated marshal to be henceforth considered Napoleon's best marshal. I thank you so very much for your time and consideration, and hope you are well. Thank you.
Marshal Saint Cyr there, covered by Noah Fink, who was very kind in the course of all of that. An interesting case, very different. A lot of these, for some of the inverted commas quieter marshals, as I refer to them, the ones that people don't immediately refer to, I think we've heard some more interesting comments about wider character and other attributes. Because there's less kind of look, point to this shiny event that happened. Key victories, that's a problem. A talent for urban warfare. Unusual to reference that during this period because there isn't much in the way of sustained urban warfare apart from scuffles well, scuffles is putting it too mildly, but fighting within villages, okay. But even when it comes to sieges, the fighting isn't taking place really in the streets. It's taking place elsewhere. Aloof and imperious, probably arrogant with that. But hey, are we seriously suggesting that many of these men didn't show catastrophic arrogance?
I mean, when you have an outfit like that, it's hard not to sort of own it a bit.
You can empathize. Sometimes there's a need for a bit of swag. I think my problem with this is he just a lesser Davout? Is it as simple as that? You've got lots of things here that are very credible and make him a very good commander, but is he just sort of Davout light? And no, that's no criticism of your pitch. It was a cracking pitch, and thank you for it. But I wonder again, is it sort of the material that we've got here? We've got somebody who's kind of sitting in Davout's shadow in terms of qualities.
I think that's probably quite a fair assessment because all of the things that I have taken as massive positives for Saint Cyr are actually they are those things that Davout had and potentially did better. I have a careful acumen for logistics. I have the fact that he tried to preserve his men's lives, didn't necessarily sort of engage with them on an emotional level, but tried to preserve their lives and look out for them. Talented administrator. So we've got all of those background logistics, admin tasks. The one extra thing, and again, this probably doesn't make him a better marshal. It just makes him a cooler man in my eyes, is the fact that he liked to do complex drawings of fortifications in Spain. Sounds like he should have been a British Royal Engineer, to be honest. He should have popped on over, a bit of British Royal Engineer. Redoubts. I do love a good redoubt. But I acknowledge that probably can't make him the greatest marshal, but it does make me think he's a lot cooler than I originally thought he was. But also, massive special shout out to Noah's moustache.
This is true. Noah does sport a good moustache. It cannot be denied. So there you go, Noah. You probably weren't expecting to get points for your facial hair. It certainly wasn't a category that I considered when I was putting this together.
My loyalty is easily bought, and we keep going on about integrity with these marshals. I'm not pretending to have some. It's fine.
This is true. You are, if nothing else, consistent in that regard. Josh, as an owner of a moustache, did you equally look at Noah's pitch and as an owner of a moustache. I also have a moustache of sorts, but a substandard one, I will freely admit. As the owner of a better moustache, did you kind of look at Noah's facial hair and think, yes, this is a compelling point that I will include in my assessment, and therefore elevate his marshal in my considerations?
I mean, people with moustaches, they're the brethren, so we've gotta give props to that. But I tried to not let it sway me because obviously, there is a code.
So what you're saying is that you have integrity and Sam doesn't.
I just she doesn't have a moustache, so she doesn't know.
Sam will
wait,
duly rectify
there is
this, and acquire a fake moustache.
We may have to. Right, that's a full beard. Okay.
That is a truly terrifying prospect.
Okay.
Sam Jolly has just
very
donned what looks
impressive.
like a Brian Blessed beard.
My goodness, it's almost as if it's a different person.
But
Does
we
that
were
mean I get 2 votes?
No, it doesn't. Not unless you can shout, but what about big tomatoes in a convincing Brian Blessed way?
But yeah,
Saint Cyr, yeah.
Sure. His moustache is bigger than mine. In the rankings, I'm sure that counts for a lot. But the thing is that I'm man enough to admit it. But the thing is, Saint Cyr,
Please, Josh, this is a clean podcast.
I'm trying to buck the trend. Anyhow, there's a problem with marshals in the sense that some of them are made marshals after others. Saint Cyr was made a marshal in 1812 for the Battle of Polotsk, which is the western theater of the 1812 invasion of Russia. He's up against Wittgenstein, and Wittgenstein drives him back as Napoleon retreats. Now, that's tactics and strategy and whatnot. Doesn't really tell us much, but if you're basing it on the Polotsk campaign, then they have better demonstrations of military prowess than Polotsk. He is interesting in my eyes because he's a sort of more reserved marshal, and he's not one of the particularly flamboyant ones. He's not as perhaps stern as Davout, and he tries to keep his men in line. He's one of the disciplinarian ones, which is again, for some reason, the ones who are maybe this is why he sort of falls through the cracks a little. It's not very terribly well known. Possibly again because when he only enters the marshallate late on, he's one of those ones who wins a victory out of a disastrous campaign, and you fling a baton at him to show that yay, we're doing stuff.
So almost a propaganda marshal, or at least a case could be made that this is look, we're doing significantly enough that Napoleon is handing out batons. Don't panic, guys. Even if you're looking at a map and seeing that all of these crushing victories that we're winning are getting steadily closer to Poland as we go through the winter.
But in his defense, he is given an independent theater to operate in, and I rank that highly if a marshal is given that responsibility away from the eye of Napoleon. That he didn't pull off a dramatic victory and take St. Petersburg is the problem with that, essentially.
Yeah, that is a fair point. He doesn't have, I don't feel he has a breakout moment, either tactically or just in terms of chronology. There isn't a moment that properly elevates him to the Saul tier or the Messina tier. When you get to some of those guys, there are conversations that you have where you go, yes. And you make a good point, is this that actually he doesn't get the chance to shine because it's not until 1812 that he's getting his batons. So, where are those opportunities? Somebody like Ney's had more of them. Ditto Davout. So yes, some really nice points made there. And I think going back to the thing about talent for urban warfare, in a different time and a different campaign, that would be great. but this is not the period of urban warfare, and that therefore it's a very valid point on, look, this guy's got a significant skill that others don't necessarily demonstrate. Cough, Mura. But I'm being facetious there, but seriously, Dos de Mayo, get in the bin. The next episode is going to be fun when we do Mura. When it comes to urban warfare, I think you need to be a 20th century commander, quite frankly. You need to be involved in significant counterinsurgency operations for that to be truly significant. And you've got to do a lot of them and do it in a context that really matters. So Noah, we seem to like your moustache. That seems to be the consensus in the room. Congratulations there, and a very nice pitch.
It was
But
a very
again,
gallant pitch for a difficult marshal to pitch for greatest
indeed.
marshal.
And also respect for taking on a really challenging pitch. You know, some of these guys, there's a lot that you can talk about, and the challenge is, what do you say within your 7.5 minutes that each of my guests was allotted? For others, it's how do you make a convincing case against a Ney or a Murat or a whoever it might be, who just has that almost cult-like following anyway. So respect there. Sam, anything else to add to this?
No, not at all. I completely agree with that. Noah took like a baby marshal and made him sound like an adult marshal. So I think he did a really, really good job. And he's left me liking Saint Cyr when I didn't actually give a flying fuck before. So I think that in itself is a victory.
There we go. Okay. Wasn't quite expecting you to confess to that over the course of the episode. But we shall now move on to the last in this heat. This time we are doing Jourdan, who is championed by Hans-Karl Weiss.
Bonjour, citoyen. Why is Jourdan the best marshal? Jean-Baptiste Jourdan, not Jean-Baptiste Bernadotte, this time Jean-Baptiste Jourdan, was born on the 29th of April 1762 at Limoges, Department Haute-Vienne. He died at the 23rd of 11th, 1833 in Paris as commandant of the Hôtel des Invalides. He joined the army when he was 16 years old and takes part in the American War of Independence in the West Indies and in the failed assault at Savannah in 1779. He served with the Regiment Auxerrois. In 1804, he is created Marshal of France. Despite opposing or not supporting the coup of the 18th Brumaire and being an ardent Republican with well-known Jacobite sentiments, Napoleon could not withhold the baton from the general who had driven in 1794 the enemy from the Sacrée Patrie, the sacred soil of France. Compared to other marshals and their days of glory like Davout at Auerstedt, he commanded big armies in 1794 to 1796 and waged full-fledged campaigns. His army, like the famous Sambre-Meuse, were up to 75,000 men strong, and the campaign stretched hundreds of miles. When the French Republic was in greatest peril, he saved her by victories like Wattignies at October 1793 with 60,000 men beating the Austrians and by this relieving Maubeuge. In the greatest crisis, he was the savior of France. His greatest campaign was that of 1794, which culminated in the victory of Fleurus at the 26th of June 1794, fielding a balloon, the L'Entrepreneau. It was noted that the French army was singing and dancing La Carmagnole when fighting against the Allied. Dansons la Carmagnole, vive le son, vive le son. Dansons la Carmagnole, vive le son du canon. So other songs than the Marseillaise were sung. According to Soult, who took part, he experienced 15 hours of the most desperate fighting in his life. At Fleurus, Jourdan proved his ability as a tactician, and the victory was due to the moral courage with which he threw the last reserves into the fray. He was, of course, aided by such able generals as Championnet, Lecoultre, Bernadotte, Lefebvre, Kléber, Marceau, to name a few. By this stage of the war, the court in Austria was convinced that it was no longer worth the effort to keep the Netherlands provinces. It is sad to see that such an important campaign with numerous victories stand in the shadow compared to those other marshals in the Napoleonic campaigns. But who commanded such sized armies and waged such great campaigns? Even victories, as said before, like Auerstedt or Eckmühl, pale against 1794. He was beaten in 1796 by one of the greatest Allied commanders, Erzherzog Archduke Charles. He also lost the balloon, L'Entrepreneur, at the Battle of Würzburg 1796, which still can be seen in the Heeresgeschichtliche Museum in Vienna. He later befriended Joseph Bonaparte and became his Major General, a position similar to Batier to Napoleon. Due to the malice of Napoleon, he was struck off from the Almanach Imperial under the pretext that he was now under Spanish establishment. He had no authority over other marshals in Spain, and his sage advice was ignored, and he was also present at the defeat at Vittoria 1813. I'd just like to remind that also Napoleon was beaten by Archduke Charles and Wellington as well. In summary, Jourdan has, like in no other marshals, conducted successful campaigns with great armies in saving France. Also, he was married, had 5 daughters, was no adulterer like Napoleon. He was Republican, still was faithful to the French king in 1815 when Napoleon came back, and he refused to take part in the court against Ney, risking his career. When we take the accounts of 1793 and 1794, without any doubt for me, he must be considered to be the best marshal.
Hans-Karl Weiss there, championing Jourdan, the man who arguably kept the revolution alive. This is an interesting one, and it taps into what you were saying in the previous episode, Josh, that some of these guys actually shine before they even get their batons. And that becomes part of the challenge, especially in the sense that in terms of what people talk about when it comes to the marshals, they do talk about the post-awarding phases of their careers. Now, Jourdan doesn't have a glitter, and Hans-Karl is very clear about that, doesn't have a sort of a glittering post-baton career. But can you make the case, as you can perhaps for one of the other marshals that we will look at in due course, that without Jourdan, nobody gets a baton? And therefore, without Jourdan, this conversation never even happens. Josh nods quietly.
Yes. Jourdan, again, comes to us with the stain of Spain on him.
I'm going to be really apologetic for this because I am jumping in and I've cut both of you off on a few occasions. Bad podcasting, but it's an important point to make, actually. Vittoria is the problem, but I am going to make the case that it's not his fault.
Well, yes, exactly.
Problem, because he's ill the day before. He's literally in bed with a fever, drags himself out of bed on the morning of Vittoria, realizes that everybody else is screwed up, starts issuing orders to deal with this, only for him to then discover that actually Wellington's already on the move. You can't move now. It's too damn late. So I don't blame him for Vittoria, even though nominally he is in command.
No, it's rather difficult to assign who has the most responsibility for Vittoria, but
Joseph. Declaring my biases there, but yeah, sorry.
Indeed, indeed. It's like I hesitate only because I don't know to the extent of who was in literal command on the field. Jourdan, however, is one of those guys who gets a bad situation, and then that's all anybody remembers. However, pitch and Case are extremely strong for Jourdan, even though he is certainly one of the guys who is one of France's greatest marshals rather than Napoleon's, perhaps because during the Empire he was stuck in Spain and various other jobs that didn't allow him to flex his muscles, so to speak. But no, absolutely, the point is extremely well made that the Battle of Fleurus is one of the great battles of the wars. He is the savior of France. He was given his baton in the new government, in the new army because of that. He could not be ignored. He's a bit of a legacy, but that shouldn't technically really discount him for being very high up in the tiers because he had full independent command. He exercised it extremely well. He did not have full independent command at Vittoria. He was the military advisor to a king who didn't know what he was doing. And so I would rate him quite highly.
Yeah, I think there's no question he's a capable commander. I also want to do a shout out to Hans-Karl for singing in his pitch.
Yes.
We've had a flamboyant costume. We've had the editing in of music. We've had strong facial hair games, and now we have singing. And I must say, Hans-Karl can hold a tune, certainly far better than I can. Although admittedly, that is a very low bar to clear. Sam, let me get your take on this. A guy whose contribution I think is largely forgotten, but integrity was big for this particular marshal. How does that sit with you in this? I'm not implying that you don't have integrity and you don't value integrity, but not inclined to just do what he's not a Napoleonic yes man. Do you know what I mean? So what was your read on all of this when it came to Jourdan?
So I do quite like Jourdan. And particularly I know it's in the scale of what makes someone the best marshal, this one fact doesn't necessarily pip it. But I really like the fact that he refused to sit on the trial of Ney. I really like that. That is it's a huge sign of his integrity. And I think I agree with the argument that most of his shining star quality was in the revolutionary years, but I also agree that that doesn't necessarily mean he's not in the running to be one of the best marshals, because it's being that man and doing those things that, as you say, Josh, got him that baton.
Well, it's like if Napoleon had made all these marshals, like the new marshals, he threw in a bunch of new guys, divisional commanders and whatnot, and if they all failed, you still had the Jourdans in the marshalate. You could rely on them to do stuff, because in the revolution you had Napoleon, you had Moreau, you had Jourdan, and these are the big hitters that, Moreau had nothing to do, wanted nothing to do with Napoleon, but you had these big hitters, and that's why they're marshals. And just in case, perhaps the Davouts and the Neys weren't really up to it.
I mean, this is the other thing that we really haven't considered, but perhaps will become more significant both through this picture and another in due course. What happens if Napoleon's unfortunate enough to catch a cannonball pre-1799, and somebody like Jourdan would be an individual who people would at least consider and talk about and regard as somebody of significance, not necessarily somebody who could step up to the plate and lead their own coup. I'm not even sure. I don't know enough about Jourdan's character to make an assessment on whether he would have been so inclined as to lead the Brumaire coup. But when you have success of that ilk prior to 99, actually what you're talking about is perhaps, is this guy on a par with Napoleon? As opposed, I think the answer to that is no, not quite. But
lack of evidence, really, on that score, to be honest.
True. Perhaps limited opportunity. Napoleon gets greater opportunities for.
I mean, to be completely fair to Bonaparte, it's the first Italian campaign is legitimately his own. There are very few generals who could have pulled off what he pulled off there. Maybe because he thought he was lost completely and just said, right, I don't care, I'm just going to do anything I can to stay alive here. Oh no, I'm winning. And that worked. But all the generals of Europe, including the top tier ones like Suvorov, was like, this Bonaparte guy knows what he's doing. So it's fair to say that I think you're probably right. You can't really say that he's a contender to Napoleon. But he did win one, but it can't be ignored that he won one of the biggest, most important battles of the pre-Napoleonic period for France.
Okay, doke. So kudos there to Jourdan. Anything else we want to say before we move to voting on this? No, we all seem quite happy. So the format is apparently flawed based on the judgments of the last episode. 5 points go to the strongest pitch, 4 to the second strongest, and so on. But we need to determine which we regard as the strongest cases. So we did the last one live on air. Let's see how this one goes down. I have to reserve judgment until the end in case I'm required for a casting vote. This could get spicy. Sam, would you like to go first with your assessment this time?
Yes, I am sure my rankings probably won't surprise anybody. First is Davout, then Jourdan, then Saint Cyr, then screw you, Bessieres.
Bessier is the ghost of Bessier has communicated with me and wishes to lodge his discontent with the shade being cast by Sam Jolly there.
Well, maybe he shouldn't have tried to get Lance demoted. Did he think about his actions at the time?
If you weren't familiar with this already, Sam does have an amateur dramatics background that is coming out in full force during these episodes. Okay. Full disclosure, I agree with you entirely. So we have actually decided the order because Josh has outvoted 2-1. So I'm very sorry about this, Josh. I am interested in your voting and reasoning anyway, but this is democracy.
Just to pretend that he's.
We've got to keep up appearances, man. Come on,
Right.
get with the program.
I would have probably. I think that.
Oh, he's thinking hard about this.
The first two are in total agreement, Davout and Jourdan, absolutely in that order. I think that simply based on my criteria that the ones who get assigned independent commands have slightly more of a case for them, I will agree without objection to Saint Cyr being above Bessieres, even though Bessieres is probably a greater marshal.
Oh, Josh is conflicted. I noticed that Sam's arguments aren't what swayed you there. But yes, and I should just say that it wasn't Sam's arguments that swayed me either. As Sam now descends into fits of hysterics. I may have managed to kill one judge in the course of 2 of these heats. If you would like to apply to replace Sam Jolly as a judge, please write to P.O. Box. I don't even have a P.O. Box, so I don't know why I started this tired joke in the first place. Okay, so we have unanimity amongst our judging panel. So Davout acquires 5 points, Jourdan 4, Saint Cyr 3, and Bessieres 2. A big thank you once again to my judges. We won't delve on quite how flawed the voting system is on this show, but it is now over to you folks, so you can now have your say. If you're watching on YouTube, please just comment on who your favorite marshal is, and I will tally those up and add that to the final quota. And last but by no means least, if you are on Twitter, you can head over to Twitter. Details will be in the descriptor to this episode. Just scroll down through the description and you will find the relevant link to my Twitter feed, where you will be able to find the relevant vote and previous votes that have been held as part of this series. And I will then tally all of that together, and whoever gets the most votes ends up coming out top of the popular vote, and we'll work it out from there. Oh dear, Sam is about to comment on something.
No, I was just thinking that the only real way that we can end this episode in honor of poor Bessieres losing pitch. Shrewd operator. Shrewd operator.
That's just rubbing salt in the wound, because of course, if he hadn't been shrewd, or if he had been shrewd and hadn't gone after Lan, he might have scored more highly. So was he really that shrewd?
I don't think we should dwell too much on this, because the man commanded the Imperial Guard, and that could tip him back over Saint Cyr. All right, so I don't think we should dwell too much on this.
What you're saying is that Sam's position may yet be usurped. On that promising, I don't know if that's a promising note. We'll call it a promising note. On that promising note, we shall end. Huge thank you as ever to my judges. Sam Jolly, curator of the Royal Logistic Corps Museum, Worthy Down, Winchester, and Josh Proven, Master of Adventures in Historyland, author of Bullock's Grain and Good Madeira, and Every Hazard and Fatigue. Folks, you've been listening to the Napoleonic Wars podcast. Thank you very much for your company. Thank you to the individuals who have pitched, the fans of the show who got involved and got behind this initiative. In this episode, you have heard Rachael Stark championing Davout, Alan Morehouse championing Bessieres, Noah Fink making the case for Saint Cyr, and Hans-Karl Weiss on behalf of Jourdan. We will be back very soon. Folks, do me a favor, make sure you are following the Napoleonic Wars podcast. Hit that subscribe button so that you can find your way back. And if you're loving the show, please leave a review. Remember, we're in the midst of trying to rebuild after Spotify unplugged us from at least a third of our listener base. So these are all the most powerful things that you can do to help with that recovery. If you want to go that little bit further, remember that there is a Patreon feed. Head to patreon.com/the Napoleonic Wars pod, where you can find a host of perks, from early releases to exclusive content, behind the scenes footage, exclusive meetups, and much more besides. Shout outs to my mentioned in dispatches patrons: Rob Griffith, Brendan Teeling, Beatrice de Graaf, Lynn Dawson, Jamie Kingston, Lucy Tatner, Jim Deary, Josh Keeney, Colin Fieldhouse, Stephen Colson, Jim Getz, Stephen Gillen, Hugh Brennan, Alistair Campbell-Grieve, Andy Meakin, Mark Hanscom, Rob Coughlin, Bruins Girl, Noah Fink, Mark Trowbridge, Miles Reedy, Nick Overland, Graham Goodwin, Chris Pramas, Anthony Gumbau, Anonymous American, Martin Pisani, James Fluick, Natasha Hobday, Rod Schwager, Chris Kimball, Gary Dennis, David Graylick, Ted Andrews, David Milinsky, Richard Anderson, Arthur Forgy, Sam Moore, Wyatt Pollock, Carol Dixon Smith, Roland Shark, Jason Mohan, Mark Chestnut, and Giovanni. And the Admirals: John Haynes, Ryan Diamond, JC Kaiser, Bob Burnham, Mike Guest, Liam Telfer, Todd and Laird Campbell, Rachael Stark, Mark Duckers, David Maxwell, David Prince, Graham Callister, Sean Sullivan, Stephen Ashford, Dan Hazelwood, Kate Walcombe, Clemens Bell, Charles McKay, Reto the Sci-Fi Fan, and Tim Day. I'll be back very soon, but until then, I'm Zach White. This has been the Napoleonic Wars pod. Take care of yourselves, my friends. Stay well, stay safe, and as always, thank you for listening.